The dream of political, economic, and monetary union of Europe has over 2 decades of constant tensions. For some governments and institutions, the European Union is still the best and most successful model for integration, unity, prosperity, and peace. But one thing is what the owners say, while the citizens say other things. According to the opinions, those against the community bloc are above the federal ones in 3 countries beyond the UK, Spain, Greece, and France. The divorce, already set by the English, is now continued by other fights between capital institutions. But inside of the bloc, there's an industrial bloc in the north against the south that finds asymmetries and contradictions. The Brexit will find a domino effect, and there will be a rebellion against the EU. Is this the case? Let's take a look in Critical Moves today. Apparently, the United Kingdom did not think it was going to be so difficult to get away from the European Union. 43 years before, when they became part of the EU, the day to say goodbye finally to the community bloc is March 29, 2019. However, the struggle is so big that talks are still stuck about the fact that there are no customs or other controls in the border between Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, member of the European Union. Theresa May needs to act quickly in order to close an agreement as soon as possible, which is both acceptable for her divided government as well as for the rest of the countries of the UE. The European Union wants to continue with the UK being good friends, and they want to avoid other countries from taking this same path. This will not be good for European countries, and it will not be the act of a friend. I cannot set a date for an agreement on Brexit. There are still some matters, and it's my responsibility to say that equality, sustainability, credibility of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland are a priority. Let's take a look at some of our web portals, and let's see how Sputnik tackles this topic with the headline, "The EU is at risk of a poll exit." The President of the European Council and Prime Minister of Poland declared to the media that his country could also leave the EU by accident if the authorities of the country still keep conflicts with Brussels. However, in the case of Poland, European authorities are not willing to keep the country as a member of the European Union, as in the case of the United Kingdom. So the situation for themselves is getting more and more complicated. Now, let's take a look at Voltaire by Termeson, published in 2016. However, that is still valuable today based on the status quo of the European bloc today. Brexit resets the board of global geopolitics. The Brexit set at stake not only the viability of the European Union, but also all the institutions that allow domination of the states worldwide. Without Russia and now without the United Kingdom, the construction of Europe has definitely died. They all believe, mistakenly, that Brexit opened the gap that those against the euro will try to take advantage of. However, the Brexit is just an answer to the decadence of the United States. The Brexit shows the end of the domination of ideology of the United States, of the cheap democracy of the 4 liberties. And now, let's go to Athens, where our correspondent Hibai Arvidas is, who will be speaking about the consequences of the Brexit. Where is the impact of Brexit going? Good afternoon. Hello to our audience. It's very difficult to think about the repercussions that the Brexit will entail, because they're all speculations as of today. But we need to take a look at the change in the stage in Europe during the last years to understand why the skepticism for Europe had different connotations for the left wing years before, while now the right wing is the one capitalizing the criticism against the European Union. 3 or 4 years ago, the Central Bank of Europe, the IMF and others had severe structural adjustments for Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal and other countries. And they are the countries where the left wings were increasing, with different blocs, with the party of the coalition of the left wing that is currently governing in Portugal. Also in Spain, Sinn Féin was also taking place in Ireland, and there was a possibility of switching towards the left wing in Europe, as well as a great questioning to the European Union as of today, where some parts of the left wing wanted to take the euro as a currency away from Greece or other countries. However, now the far right are the ones capitalizing the Brexit in the United Kingdom, as well as in Italy, with what's happening today with the government of the coalition of the Cinque Stelle movement and La Lega, a racist and xenophobe party that is leading this coalition, and that is bringing more debate in Italy due to the possibility of an exit from the EU. So they've shown these budgets that for once have been rejected by the European Commission, and apparently the government of Italy does not want to take a step back, and they want to reach this debate about the possibility of going out. And this is not for social policies that will improve the livelihood of people. However, with chauvinistic policies, with xenophobe policies that on the one hand promise improvement socially for locals, however go against the rights for the migrants, and thus are not progressive policies where the left-wing forces could support in Italy or the rest of Europe. And as we can see every day, the right wing is the one governing today and the one proposing to take use of the Brexit. Thank you for this information, Ibai. Now let's take a break, but when we come back, we will be wondering why is the border between Ireland and the UK is the main hurdle for the Brexit. Who will it favor? Who is against the Brexit? We will be with this when we come back.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
Let's continue taking a look at the portals that speak about the Brexit. And today in Critical Moves, we are reading this article published by Telesur. Lawyers of the United Kingdom request a second referendum for the Brexit. Some acknowledged lawyers of the United Kingdom requested with a letter to the Prime Minister Theresa May to support the celebration of a second referendum for the Brexit. This was spread by 1,400 lawyers, including the former Judge of Appeal and the former Judge of the Justice Court. Those signing the document believe that in 2016 voters did not acknowledge the process of negotiation with the European Union, and also point out that the Parliament should not be tied to the vote of 2016. Back to this new referendum. Speaking about the referendum of 1975 for the participation of the United Kingdom in the European Union. Never before, a member country of the European Union had quit the political and economic community made up of 28 countries. Since the beginning, more and more countries have adhered to the Brexit, to the European Union. There are around 500 million inhabitants, which is around half the population of China, Africa, or India, 2/3 of the population of Latin America, and 50% more than the population of the United States. The European Union, founded in 1951, has a surface of 4 million square kilometers and a population of 508 million inhabitants, the third one in the world after China and India, as well as 6.9% of the world population. Speaking about surface, France is the biggest country of the bloc. The euro is the official currency of 19 of the 28 countries. In 2017, the GDP was of 15.3 billion euros, more than 64% of the United States. More than 64% of European trade happens between member states. Transactions with the bloc add up to 15.6% of global imports and exports. Asymmetries and inequalities divide the community between industrialized countries as Germany, Great Britain, France, Holland, Italy, Belgium, and Austria, against countries in development as the ones coming from East Europe: Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. On the other hand, there are countries as Croatia and Slovenia that were part of former Yugoslavia. And finally, the countries most hit by the economic crisis: Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and Cyprus. The European Union imports over 50% of the energy that they consume. One of the most important parts for the bloc is the migration crisis due to the war operations of the NATO in the Middle East during the last decades. According to the survey of the Eurobarometer of May 2018, 72% of Europeans want the EU to intervene more on the management of migration, speaking about 363,000 deaths and people missing of 2017 in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, let's take a look at some of the main problems that the Brexit has faced in order to leave the European Union. Brexit is the acronym of Britain and exit. The acronym is used to speak about the referendum where the British voted for its country to exit the European Union. David Cameron promised a referendum as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, under the argument that Great Britain has lost autonomy within the European Union and the illusion of the British market to stop the migratory crisis. Ever since, there's been a lot of conversations that are about 2019. In order to do so, they invoke one article of the European Union where a member state can leave the Union. The other 27 countries had to meet to discuss the conditions of its withdrawal. A project must be created between the UK and the EU and then be voted. It can only be approved if 20 countries accept this. When approved, it should be ratified by the European Parliament. According to the minister, in order to exit the European Union, the Brexit agreement could be ready on November 21. Among the direct consequences that the UK will face will be losing benefits as well as losing the condition as members of the community to those who live in the continent. So, answering this question, 51.9% voted no and 48.1% voted yes. Now, let's go to the heart of Europe in order to analyze this topic. First, let's go to Belgium with Alex and Friends, who's a journalist, but also from England, Jorge Martin, editor of América Socialista magazine. Welcome to Telesur. And we were speaking with one of our guests in Belgium to let us know why the border with Ireland is the main obstacle for the UK to leave the European Union. Hi, thank you for inviting me to the program. One of the obstacles, as you have said, one of the issues of this political crisis of Brexit is the fact that a new border needs to be installed after a peace process in Ireland. And politically, this brings a lot of questions to the table, because a border physically must be created once again. But this isn't the problem geopolitically. Historically, I think it's important for us to remember the foundations of the historical context. Let us remember that the construction of Europe was progressively created during the Cold War. So in a bipolar world, in the war between the East and the West, where Western Europe was the force that contained the Soviet influence with the Iron Curtain. So there was a capitalistic bloc in the world, while on the other hand, the countries that vindicated socialism. Now, when the Berlin Wall fell, when the Soviet Union disappeared, the world became unipolar, and the United States became the ones that created hegemonies around the world. So Europe bought a new role in the world. Now, this is during the 90s, where there's a situation where Europe will try to build its own strategy by introducing a single market and also a policy for security, for defense, and then also monetary policies. As you said before, it is important to know that so far Europe has widened the number of member countries. And with the situation of Brexit with a referendum, this gap was created for the first time, where openly the construction of Europe is defied. And Europe is not willing to tolerate this. So for Europe, this is a big challenge. But therefore, there's a disbalance in the relationships, in these negotiations that are being created. On the one hand, the United Kingdom had never been part of the European project. They became part of the community, but not part of the Eurozone, of the Schengen zone either. So now we're facing a situation where the United Kingdom would like to develop international trade with bilateral agreements, which cannot be carried out in the European Union. So this is basically the situation. So Ireland is one of the aspects that this political crisis brings to the table, but it has plenty of consequences. Alex, let's bring to our analysis Jorge Martin from England. So when understanding think that the border with Ireland is not the only obstacle, by acknowledging that within the government of Theresa May, there are people for and against the Brexit. Then, what has complicated this divorce? Disparting from the European Union. England will try to keep outside the European Union the same conditions that they had when they were part of LOC. So what do you think about this?
Claro, lo primero que hay que entender es que el voto del Brexit de
Well, first,
2016 era
the Brexit
un voto
vote
que la
in
clase, los sectores
2016
fundamentales de la clase
were the
dominante de
fundamental
los
sectors
capitalistas,
of
banqueros,
the
británicos no
capitalists
querían.
and
Fue
bankers
un
did
voto,
not
digamos,
want. It was
insurgente,
an insurgent
contra el
vote.
establishment.
It was a vote against the establishment. It was a protest from the poorest sectors of Great Britain, who somehow thought that by retrieving the control over their monetary policy, they would be able to solve their problems. So in my opinion, this is not going to be the case. But in any case, this wasn't the vote that the dominant class won, where David Cameron, representative of the Conservative Party, went to this referendum to win, and he was campaigning for yes, to be part of the European Union. Now, the vote did not agree with their opinion, and now they need to negotiate the Brexit with the smallest impact possible against the interest of the great capitalists, industrials, and bankers in Great Britain. And it's very difficult to do so because 2/3 of foreign trade of Great Britain go to the European Union. And if any type of tariffs and hurdles for free trade are created with Europe, then this will have a negative impact in British companies. For example, this week, two companies of the auto parts sector, Pirelli and another one, announced closing their operations in Britain with 1,500 job positions because the auto sector is completely integrated in the European Union. So, manufacturing a car in Great Britain requires parts that are imported from Italy, Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and they go through different borders. And if hurdles for this type of trade are created, this will have a negative economic impact. Bad capitalists of Great Britain would like to have free trade, be part of the single market, but at the same time control immigration and also have their own laws in a lot of different aspects, and also create agreements with other countries. This is one of the main problems they are facing. The European Union cannot grant Great Britain favorable conditions for their exit because this would entail that other countries of Europe would start questioning whether they belong or not to the European Union. The European Union, as of today, is facing a crisis. It's not only a migratory crisis, you said before, but also an economic crisis that has been trailing for many years already, and that has affected, first of all, peripheral countries, but now is also reaching bigger countries, stronger countries as Italy, France, and also slowing down the economy in Germany. Martin, it is also said that millions of tourists will no longer visit the United Kingdom after the Brexit. So who is the Brexit favoring and who is it against? There's a sector of the dominant class of Great Britain that believes that they can have commercial agreements with other parts of the world, with the United States, and also with China, Australia, and others. And I think that this is a utopia. It's the old idea that Great Britain keeps a special relationship with the United States, and this special relationship means a favorable treatment for Great Britain. However, the United States and the President Trump are defending their own interest through protectionism, and in any case, Great Britain does not have the economic power or military power that they had 100 years ago.
una pequeña potencia insignificante que
Now they're just a
en
small
relación a
power.
Estados Unidos no es más
And
que perrito faldero de su amo, ¿no?
when
Entonces eso
you
es
compare them to the States, they're
visión
just a very, very small part. So it's a real utopic vision that some sectors of the middle class keep. Exiting the European Union will not benefit the capitalists nor the workers in Great Britain, who will be the ones who the capitalists will make pay for this crisis. This doesn't mean that from the perspective of the European Union this is successful. We both lose, and we will lose in both scenarios, because being part of the EU is part being a club of a group of capitalist countries that wants to impose austerity policies against the working class, favoring capitalists of the dominant countries, especially Germany, that also has a racist military policy, as you said before, the policy of the force of Europe that makes deals and agreements with countries as Turkey or Morocco and Bolivia in order to create apprehension camps for migrants outside their borders in order to keep them away from their borders by using barbed wires and soldiers to avoid these people who flee from wars, from poverty and misery caused by imperialism of Europe and its intervention here. The working class will not win anything being part of the European Union, but if they are away and if they're isolated, they will not have anything to earn. So let me ask you, Alex, some sectors want to turn this decision around, and some believe that a referendum could be created against to take this decision back. What do you think about this? Well, it's a difficult scenario, and I don't think it's a legitimate thing to do, to turn around against this referendum. The population voted for this, and today a referendum will be even more difficult. Within the conservative government, there's been some tensions. There are different positions within those who defend the Brexit, and different positions with those against. Specifically, in the government, the negotiator of the Brexit with the European Union resigned because he thought the proposal of Theresa May was granting control of their laws through a common regulation. And there have been already some summits where it has been seen that there's one perspective for Brexit, a version that has been stated from one part where there have been meetings with industrials and the government, a round table where industrials show their satisfaction with the position of the government of Great Britain, defending the interests of the industrials with an agreement that is adapted. At least it's the proposal that they wanted to show the European Union. However, the chief negotiator of the European Union does not agree with this proposal because adapting, creating a specific case, specific agreement for access to the European market only for goods from the United Kingdom will set a benchmark. So from the European Union, there's a difference in the model, where the single market of the European Union means that from the perspective of services, of goods and capital and people, So now we find this contradiction. So there are going to be no new negotiations, and we are going to see what's the result. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a never-ending process, because the perspective on a non-agreement would really be the greatest concern for the economy of Great Britain, and I don't think that they would like to go to this point. So, with all the contradictions that have been generated by this process, and also due to the difficult process that the bloc has faced during the last 20 years, this would mean, for example, there could be a possibility of having a domino effect in the European Union, where other countries would also take the decision of leaving the bloc. As long as the Brexit is a message that weakens the European Union in its current form, I think it's going to be something positive. As long as it favors a political conscience, a participation of society in decisions, creating awareness about the fact that governments should decide with the representatives in national parliaments for their own strategic decisions. But now, at the same time, this is just a phase of awareness raising, because there is a belief, specifically, this belief is growing in Europe, stating that becoming nationalistic would create a solution by itself. However, the rights of workers will not be ensured by this, because this will favor the national capitalistic classes. So there is a crisis of legitimacy in the European Union, which is brought by reactionary forces of the far right, and now there is a rhetoric against the system, specifically against the European Union, and this rhetoric neutralizes the alternatives. My solution would be for popular sectors to mobilize their vindications and try to reach a popular sovereignty. If they exit the European Union, they will not find a satisfactory clause for popular crisis. Let's bring Martin to this matter, and let's ask him, Martin, these popular sectors are claiming for this in the European Union, when we saw that beyond the actual representation of leaving the EU by the UK, there are signs and alarms of how there's a difference in the EU, a north and a south, an east and a west. I agree with Alex's comments. Indeed, the crisis of the European Union show a crisis of capitalism. The European Union is a club of capitalistic pirates. When the bounty is big, it's easy to see how to divide this, but whenever there's a crisis, it becomes more difficult for the pirates to agree on who is going to take the bounty, and the stronger pirates, of course, will have a domination over the division, in this case, the German capitalists, and this leads to this trend of crisis in the European Union. However, thinking that the solution is independence or sovereignty of currency within the framework of capitalism will not solve the crisis. Maybe it would even worsen it. So I think that the option, as Alex said, should be an option that tries to defend the interests of the working class in every country, as well as the common interests of workers against those interests of capitalists. And this is an alternative that has not been seen so far, but it needs to be sat on the table. It needs to be considered so that the interest of the working class could be defended. I would like to add something. In Great Britain, there's another factor, and I do believe that at the end of the day, there's going to be some sort of agreement, an agreement that will not satisfy anyone. But as Alex mentioned, the perspective of the Brexit without an agreement would be an actual disaster from an economic point of view. It would be something that would break commercial relationships, and capitalists are against this, of course. So an agreement will be reached. It will not be satisfactory. It might be changed in the future, but there are other factors in Great Britain that push towards this way. Because if this government falls, if Theresa May's government falls and there are new elections, then most likely Corbyn will win the elections of the Labour Party, someone who considers himself a socialist and has a leftist policy rather than the one that Great Britain has kept for many decades. And even if conservatives are divided about their perspectives on Brexit and the plans of Theresa May in negotiating for this, they're all together in the rejection of the perspective of the Corbyn's governance. They will try to keep Theresa May in power and reach some type of agreement with the European Union in order to prevent the left wing from being in power in Great Britain. The arrival of the left wing will eventually come sooner than later, in my opinion, and it will be part of a general change in the European Union, where, of course, there's a growth of populist forces of the right wing as well as liberals, but also left-wing forces that are now facing the crisis of the system, or that try to face the crisis of the system from the left wing, from the interest of the working class. So, among the alternatives that you have proposed, how can the differences be solved? The ones that today lead to some countries of the European Union to be more powerful and others weaker with debts and without any type of money. Countries in debt, as Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and others, is the other side of the coin of capitalists getting richer in other countries, in Germany, France, and in other countries as Finland and Austria, wealthier countries of the European Union. So, one thing goes hand by hand with the other, where the structural differences are based on the design itself of the European Union as a coordination organism of different capitalist classes of different countries that don't have the same level of economic power. So the only way of getting over with this is by stopping the capitalist system in the European Union, starting with the weaker links, but also going to the core points. And I think that the best option for the capitalist European Union could not be just a collection of capitalist states that will also be dominated by the most powerful states, but the socialist union of European countries, a socialist confederation of all of Europe based on different principles of the collective property of the means of production, transportation, distribution, and the popular management and control of the working class in order to benefit the majority. This is the only way out of the capitalistic crisis that we're facing, in my opinion. Thank you, Martin, and also thank you, Alex, from Belgium. Now, let's take a short break, but when we come back, we will continue speaking about the consequences that the crisis of the European Union entails, a bloc that has said goodbye to the state of well-being. We'll be right back.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your green zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Negotiations that imply the exit of the UK from the European Union for March 2019 are reaching its decisive stage, and they are weakened due to different perspectives and struggles between those in charge of this process.
Donald Tusk,
President of the European Council, stated that the exit plan proposed by Theresa May will not work. On October 23, May stated that 95% of the agreement with the European Union was done. She, who first was for the UK staying in the European Union, finally agreed with this. There are different perspectives and everyone follows their agreement. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, leads a negotiation as in the crisis of Greece in 2015. He is not for the division. Michel Barnier, negotiator for the European Union, promised a fair agreement but with no concessions or favors, and added that he will agree if Theresa May and Donald Tusk reach an agreement. For Barnier, the priority is to be protected against the consequences of customs for Ireland and Northern Ireland. David Davis of the Conservative Party believes in a thriving United Kingdom out of the European Union. Tim Barrow, the permanent ambassador of the UK for the EU, represents a safe option in Brussels. Donald Tusk is the guarantor for the unity of the 27. President of the European Council coordinates the work of the President of Europe during negotiations, and in divorce with the United Kingdom, there will not be favors for anyone. Guy Verhofstadt, liberal member of European Federalism, wants to involve the European Parliament in negotiations that also have the participation of the chief of Brexit forces, who represents the capital forces, and Leo Varadkar from Ireland, who believes in an agreement reached in December. And for this segment, in Critical Moves, we have from Ecuador, Eduardo Meneses, who's a politologist, who will also share his opinion. Eduardo, beyond the intention shown in the referendum of the United Kingdom of leaving the European Union, that is also taking us away from the current situation of the community. What do you think about this? First of all, thank you for your invitation. We first need to understand that there have passed 2 years since the crisis have started, a structural crisis in its creation, from the economic perspective that at some point want to validate neoliberalism for social rights of their workers. So this is a crisis that they have to prepare. But it's not possible to go beyond what the European Union has as a structure. This has been a democratic crisis. After the economic crisis of 2008 that went to Europe, we've taken certain measures about measures of the fiscal pact of Europe, with the measures of the management of the currency that have become anti-democratic, and the mixture of these two crises, one economic and the other democratic, that have led to what's happening today. in England. So we need to take a look at this in this space of crisis, which is a space that favors other interests of the transnational capital. Eduardo, you were speaking about the current crisis, but also about the way in which this bloc was created. A bloc that today has disparities in the structure that lead to a salary in Bulgaria being 8 times lower than the salary for workers in some parts of Germany, France, or Belgium. How to face this challenge in the current conditions that the European Union keeps? Is it possible to go out of this? It is clear that it is not possible to go out of this without changing the treaties. If you take a look at the European Fiscal Pact and the way in which the euro is managed with dependency on the Central Bank of Europe, it's evident that if certain of these treaties are not reformed, then this crisis will continue. The popular demands of the unions has always been for the European Union not to be only a space for opening the financial sector and the economy, but also be related to a social harmonization of rights. So the elites of Europe have always been against, and when Europe was created, it was created after a crisis of speculation between different currencies of Europe. And the exchange rate for the financial elites led to the fact where a single currency would go against the debts of the countries. If the euro continues being managed as it is, that favors the German policy, as long as no real debate is created about social rights, then nothing will change in the European Union. Eduardo, what are the consequences socially that this will bring for the working sectors, where countries as Germany are creating in other countries of the European Union, where they are creating factories for car parts that are then assembled in Germany and exported without tariffs to the countries of the EU. These are practices where the capital goes against the interest in the European Union. There's a center and a periphery with brutal measures about working conditions, rights, and they have been able to keep certain numbers economically that go towards the elites for the workers, and also seeing their companies in different places. One inside Europe itself, where people speak about the miracle of Germany for rights of the workers, and they don't speak about this because there are certain macroeconomic figures in Germany that are healthy, however, due to the exploitation of other workers in the European Union. And then this goes towards China and other workers in Africa and other countries. And we go towards the so-called false dream of the European Union, where the peoples were going to increase their democracy and the prosperity of the good living of people, and this was never the perspective by which this was managed, but it was the way of regularizing the rights of workers by making job precarious, while elites would continue accruing. Speculation is now beyond any type of democracy. So, Eduardo, under this context where the European Union apparently has said goodbye to the state of well-being, in a context where these practices that we've described are taking place, what would be the most important piece of criticism that the European Union should have in order to look ahead? Well, first of all, this goes for the nationalist movements in France and in the rest of Europe. France is an example, a very strong example, but it's not the only case. And in this perspective, we need to focus our efforts. The European people need to focus their efforts in developing a democratic foundation of their common space of life. As we said before, we are clearly aware that the economic and democratic crisis of the European Union will continue, and it will not stop as they continue expanding this to smaller states that are still capitalist and that have conditions against the well-being of people. The only solution right now to go against the extreme right, which is populist and is not answering the demands of people, which is also xenophobe and racist, is creating or refounding democracy in the European Union. And there could be different constituent programs both nationally and at the European level. And as long as we don't allow democracy to be brought into Europe, then they will still be speaking about two models, the neoliberal model on the one hand, and then those who want to show themselves as an alternative, which are the extreme right. So there are certain projects as Corbyn and others in France, and there are some people who are trying to create alternatives for this. Thank you, Eduardo, for your insights and time for Telesur. We still have a long way to go before the agreement with the United Kingdom is reached to seal the conditions of their divorce with the European Union. But beyond this struggle, after the 3 years of creation of the European Union, they can no longer hide the fractures and the symmetries. Some countries are kept in the periphery with debt and unemployment, while others in the center are favored with practices that take advantage of the inequality of the economies of the Union to improve benefits and reinforce competitivity of the big corporations. The economic crisis took away the state of well-being. The motto, united in diversity, now shows a sign of alarm. This is the analysis and critical moves.